Chord's products are pretty well known in the audiophile game, especially with regards to the Hugo 2 and perhaps even more so when it comes to their most affordable offering, the Mojo. But the company makes a whole host of other products, including some dedicated high-quality standalone DACs. Here we have the Qutest, which is the successor to the 2Qt. So when it comes to Chord electronics, they make some of the most quirky looking devices out there. I wouldn't necessarily call them over-the-top designs, but they are quite unique. Some people love the looks, while others don't particularly care for it. I've been able to review both the Mojo and the Hugo 2, and the Qutest has some definite design similarities to those two devices. Those glowing orb buttons and the viewing port has become quite an iconic Chord design element. However, what I did notice about both the Mojo and the Hugo 2, especially with the Hugo 2, is that they didn't feel quite as solid as they looked. The Qutest, on the other hand, I'm pretty certain could be classified as a certifiable weapon in some countries. It honestly feels physically solid, even though you can clearly see through the viewing port that the device is hollow. It really does have a deceptive amount of heft to it. Overall, the layout is quite simple, as we only get two buttons and the viewing port on the top plate. Then on the rear is where we find the micro USB power port, a USB data port, a pair of coaxial B and C connectors, a full-sized optical port, and finally a set of RCA outputs. You may have noticed that I haven't mentioned the headphone port. Well, that's because there is none. The Qutest is purely a high-quality standalone DAC, which means that you'd have to send that line-level stereo signal to either a power or headphone amplifier or a set of powered speakers. However, if you don't have a convenient method of controlling the volume on those powered speakers, then you'd be better off placing a preamp in between the Qutest and the speakers, as there's no analog or digital volume control present on the Qutest. You can switch between a 1V, 2V or 3V line level signal, but there's no actual volume control. Now, like the Hugo 2 and the Mojo that came before it, the Qutest relies on a color LED system to convey certain information to the user. This of course can make for a very minimalist device in terms of being able to reduce the number of switches and whatnot, but it also isn't a particularly intuitive way of doing things. By using a color-coded system, what you're requiring is for the user to either memorize which colors mean what and for which function, or they have to keep the user guide nearby as a reference. Now, the Qutest doesn't have that many functions, so you kind of can get away with this type of user interface. The leftmost button is used to select between the 4 different digital filters. A white color is used to indicate that the incisive neutral filter is selected, whereas green is for the incisive neutral with high frequency roll-off. Orange is for the warm filter, and red is reserved for the warm with high frequency roll-off. Then, if we move over to the right switch, here we are again given 4 options, as this switch is used to select between the 4 different inputs. If this switch is lit in a white color, that means that the USB input has been selected, whereas yellow denotes coax 1, red is for coax 2, and lastly a green LED is for the optical input. Then finally we also have the viewing port, through which we can see another multicolor LED, which is used to indicate the sampling rate of the digital signal that's being fed to the Qutest. In total, there are 11 colors, which will show sampling rates from 44.1 kHz all the way up to DSD formats. As briefly mentioned, there are 3 different voltage levels for the line-out signal, and this too is indicated by the use of 3 different LED colors. When powering the Qutest on for the first time, we have a 16-second window in which we can adjust this voltage level. To do this, we simply need to press and hold both the filter and the input buttons simultaneously to make an adjustment. Here we have a red color to show that the voltage level is at 1V, green is for 2V, and dark blue is for 3V. Now, you might be wondering, what would be the need for a variable voltage line level signal if there's no volume control anyways? Well, I'd wager that for most people, this is a function that they probably won't be using. You can just go ahead and set it to 2V, which is the most common line signal level. However, there are 2 scenarios where I can see these different voltage level choices being immensely helpful. Let's say that you're a fan of both digital and binaural audio, and you happen to have a collection of both. Now let's say that you've got a single set of speakers and a single amplifier which can accept multiple source inputs. Unless this amplifier has a built-in phono preamp, there is a good chance that the voltage level from your external phono preamp could be lower than the level coming out of the Qutest. So if you've just finished listening to some of your records and you then switch over back to the Qutest before turning down the volume first on your amplifier, you might be in for quite a loud surprise. So in that scenario, being able to drop the line level voltage down to 1 volt would make things more convenient. The other scenario that I can think of would be if you perhaps have an amplifier that is too powerful for your speakers or headphones. In that case, you might have very little workable range on the volume part of your amplifier. So for this, you'd be able to drop the line level coming out of the Qutest, and that would give you more of a workable volume range. Likewise, if you have a set of headphones or speakers that require more volume than what your amp can give them, by being able to up the line level from the Qutest to 3 volts, the louder signal being sent to the amp will give you a more workable volume range. So onto the sound. There's a reason why everyone in the audiophile world has heard of Chord electronics. Okay, yes, some of the groupie buzz that follows these products can often exhibit somewhat of an off-putting, holier-than-thou elitist kind of attitude. But the fact remains that Rob Watts, the brainiac behind the magic, is damn good with what he does, and there's no denying that Chord does produce some truly excellent sounding products. As the Qutest does have some selectable digital filters that do alter the sound character, let's go over them briefly and how they sound. I'm not going to delve into the high frequency roll-off filters, as those do, well, exactly that. They soften the upper registers. Instead, let's have a chat about the neutral and warm filters. The neutral is exactly what it says. It's a flat sounding signature which I'm guessing has the lowest amount of measurable distortion between all the given filters. As an overall signature, I'd say that it's enjoyable and offers what seems to be a very honest representation of the sound that's being fed to it. But when I listen to the warm filter, I must admit that I prefer this over the neutral filter. Perhaps it's because the warm signature feels more akin to the sound that I'm getting out of my iTube 2. So in essence, this filter does exactly what it says on the tin. It adds warmth to the sound without reducing the technical capability of the Qutest to retrieve details. The warmth that it's able to add has much the same result as you'd get in a tube-based setup. To me, it just adds a bit of thickness, some substance to the music. Things sound more organic and less forced in a way. I find this to be particularly true when I listen to music that has clear drum beats. Somehow the neutral filter just has what I can only describe as a certain snap to the drum hit, whereas the warm filter tends to have more of a fullness and punch. Acoustic guitars are another area where this difference in signature is more apparent to me. It's almost as though the neutral filter has more of an emphasis on the strings, whereas the warm filter seems to bring out more of the resonance from the guitar. Overall, I describe the warm filter as providing the more realistic sound to me. Again, this is very much in line with the types of differences that I perceive between the sound coming from my personal iDSD Black Label versus how it sounds when going through the iTube 2. Okay, so how about a comparison to see how the Qutest can flex its muscle? Personally, I wouldn't call myself an i5 fanboy per se, but I do appreciate good value for money when I see it. I think i5 makes some excellent performing and feature-rich products that are priced rather competitively. For me, in terms of which products to compare to Chord's products, i5 is always the one that jumps at me. Yes, Chord's products often cost quite a bit more, but one thing we need to keep in mind, and this applies to so many industries, regardless if we're talking about mechanical or electrical designs, from headphones to DACs and amps, or for the sake of the argument, even mechanical watches. The thing we always need to bear in the back of our minds is that a more expensive or otherwise more complex or elaborate design does not necessarily mean that it would be a better performing product. Now, when we consider i5's lineup, the best performing DAC solution would be the Pro iDSD, but that is also a considerably larger, more versatile, and indeed more expensive product than the Qutest. Instead, i5 states that after the Pro iDSD, the Micro iDAC 2 is their best performing desktop DAC solution. They even put it slightly ahead of the Micro iDSD Black Label. But could it be? Could a sub $400 DAC competently compete with the $1,000 Qutest? Well, there was only one way to find out. So listening to these two products back to back once again showed me just how much value is packed into iFi's products. But that being said, I can't deny the technical prowess of the Qutest. I don't know if it's because of the type of processor used to handle the audio or if it's mainly the wizardry on the part of Rob Watts, but the Qutest is a very good performing product. The odd thing is that Chord states that the Qutest is based on the Hugo 2. Okay, so how much exactly does that have in common then? Does it have the same digital to analog conversion stage, and the difference mainly comes down to the fact that the Hugo 2 has a built-in amplification stage? I really don't know, to be honest, but what I can tell you is that when I reviewed the Hugo 2 a couple of months ago, I really couldn't tell you that I found its technical capability quite as good as that of the Qutest. Well, whatever is going on here, the fact remains that the Qutest truly is a great sounding product. Comparing the sound signature of the neutral filter to the minimum phase filter on the iDAC 2, I must admit that I preferred the slightly warmer character of the iDAC 2. But then when I listened more closely and considered the detail retrieval on the Qutest, the iDAC easily takes second place in that department. But it's when we switch things over into the warm filter that the Chord pulls ahead of the iFi. The warmth that I enjoy from the iFi is there, but without sacrificing the technicality that I hear in the neutral signature of the Chord. It really does come down to being a best of both worlds kind of scenario. But then there's this total ass hat of a curveball to throw into the mix. And when I say it's a curveball, I really mean it's a curveball. Hooking the iDAC 2 up to the iTube 2 and then listening to and comparing that combo to the Qutest completely left me in a place, or rather a mindset, that I absolutely hate being in. I really cannot make up my mind which sound character I prefer more here. The differences are there, but each one has something distinct and special about it. The Chord has that technical capability of pulling out details, but then there's the iFi combo that brings to the table this fantastically organic sound. I often hear this, especially in the bass region, where the Qutest sometimes just seems a little muddy in comparison. In contrast, the iFi combo brings a specific presence and control to the bass, but without bleeding into the mids. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to your own personal preference. Well, that and perhaps your budget. If you like a slightly brighter sounding signature, and I say that entirely with reference to the tube sound of the iFi combo, then the Chord might be your pick. But both really do have their own qualities, and it honestly is impossible for me to outright call one or the other a definite winner. Shortly after this review is posted, there will be another sound demo video that'll go up, which will allow you to get a bit of a better idea of the differences and similarities in sound character. So now, taking all of that into account, how would we place the total value of the Qutest? Well, essentially, we are talking about what the total bang for buck value is here. What we get is a very nicely designed and solidly built device. It sounds great, and it does give you quite a couple of features in terms of input options, digital filters, and that user selectable voltage level for the line outputs. But it does cost $1,000. In contrast, if we look at that iFi combo, the iDAC 2 will set you back somewhere in the region of $380, and the iTube 2 is around $400. So for the sake of the argument, let's just call it $800. So $1,000 versus $800. That's an appreciable difference, but not exactly a huge difference. The thing is, with the iFi combo, you simply get more features, more functionality, and more versatility thrown into the deal. The Chord might have those B and C connections and an optical input, but the iDAC 2 on its own does also have a headphone output, and it's also able to take the USB input signal and output it via a coax connection to an external device. Then there's the iTube 2, which, because it can either act as only a buffer or a preamp, can give you both full analog volume control and a boosted line level, much like the 3V option on the Qutest. In addition to that, iFi also threw in the various tube signatures, as well as the 3D Plus and X-Bass Plus effects. When we consider all of that, we can start to see just how much is packed into iFi's products. So when picking between either the Qutest or the iFi combo, it's really going to come down to whether or not the iFi products have any additional features that you might either want or need. Another iFi combo option to consider would be that of the micro IDST Black Label coupled with the iTube 2. Together, they'll cost you roughly $1,000, so in terms of price, that would be a more direct comparison to the Qutest. In this scenario, the extra features of the Black Label, along with the fact that it can be used as a perfectly competent portable device, that would perhaps surge well ahead of the Chord in terms of overall bang for buck value. But again, absolutely none of that matters if those extra features and versatility doesn't appeal to you personally. If you perhaps prefer the look of the Chord and you don't need any of that, then really the Qutest doesn't seem like a bad buy after all. So as always, thank you so much for watching. That's all from me for now. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.